The house was silent when David unlocked the front door, stepping in after a long day at work. He glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. It was already past 9. Usually, his wife, Laura, would be waiting up for him, her familiar warmth and gentle smile greeting him as he walked through the door. But tonight, there was only the empty hum of the air conditioning and a dim light casting long shadows down the hallway. It had been an ordinary week, and their routines had stayed the same, at least on the surface. David and Laura had been married for 12 years, their lives woven together by shared memories and comfortable habits. He had always thought that they had a good marriage, one that could withstand the passing years and subtle changes. But recently, small things had begun to feel off. A few weeks ago, David noticed that Laura's phone was always close to her, either in her pocket or carefully tucked into her bag. She had started to take calls in a different room, her voice hushed. When he asked, she had brushed it off as nothing. Just calls from work or old friends catching up. One evening, he found a receipt for an expensive bottle of wine in her purse, the kind they had shared together only on special occasions. But he hadn't tasted that wine in months. And when he asked about it, she laughed and said she must have bought it on a whim, only to forget. David tried to ignore his growing unease, dismissing each small discrepancy as paranoia, a product of his own insecurities. But as the days passed, the quiet tension between them deepened, settling like dust in the corners of their home. The following Friday, David decided to surprise Laura with a weekend getaway. He wanted to recapture the spark they'd once shared, to remind her and himself of the love they'd built together. As he walked up to their front door that evening, holding a bouquet of her favorite lilies, he noticed something unusual. A car he didn't recognize was parked across the street. He brushed it off as a coincidence, but when he entered the house, his heart sank. Laura's laughter echoed from the living room, mingling with a man's voice, one that was unmistakably not his own. He froze, feeling a strange mixture of anger and fear surge through him. His hands shook as he set the flowers down on the hallway table and approached the living room, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached the doorway, he saw Laura on the couch, leaning close to a man he had never seen before. They hadn't noticed him yet, lost in their own bubble of quiet intimacy. "Laura," he said, his voice barely a whisper but enough to break the spell. She jumped, her face paling as she turned to see him standing there. Her companion looked equally startled, glancing between them with an uncomfortable smile. "David, you're home early," Laura stammered, her voice laced with a forced calm. David didn't respond. He could feel the weight of betrayal pressing on him, the trust he had in her unraveling with each passing second. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken accusations. "I'll go," the man said, clearing his throat and standing up, brushing past David with an awkward nod. Once the door closed behind him, Laura turned back to David, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Just a friend from work," she said, her gaze flickering to the side. "We were just talking," but he could see it in her eyes. The hesitation, the subtle way she bit her lip, a gesture he'd seen 100 times before when she was caught in a lie. "Talking?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "I've known you for 12 years, Laura. I know when you're lying." For a moment, her face softened, and he thought he saw a glimmer of regret. But then her expression hardened, and she crossed her arms, a defensive wall rising between them. "Maybe I wouldn't have to look elsewhere if you were around more often," she shot back, her voice sharp and accusing. David felt the words hit him like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but the anger and hurt twisted his words into silence. He turned away, walking out of the room, the sound of her voice following him, a bitter echo in the empty hallways. The days that followed were marked by a painful distance. David and Laura barely spoke, each lost in their own thoughts, memories of what they once had together haunting them both. They moved through their routines like ghosts, sharing the same space but worlds apart. One night, David found himself sitting alone on the back porch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He stared into the darkness, remembering the early days of their relationship, the promises they had made. the dreams they had shared. He wondered where it had all gone wrong, if there had been some warning sign he had missed. Just as he was lost in thought, he felt Laura's presence behind him. She sat down beside him, her own glass in hand, and they sat in silence for a while, the quiet night settling around them. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know what I was thinking. I felt empty, like something was missing. I know that's not an excuse. I don't expect you to forgive me." David didn't respond immediately, his mind torn between love and betrayal, between forgiveness and the scars left by her actions. "I loved you, Laura," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I still do. But I don't know if I can look at you the same way anymore." They sat in silence, the weight of his words hanging between them, a painful reminder of the trust that had once held them together and the betrayal that now threatened to tear them apart. In the weeks that followed, David and Laura tried to rebuild, to find some way forward. They went to counseling, shared their fears, their regrets, their hopes. But the scars of betrayal lingered, casting shadows over every word, every touch, every attempt to move past what had happened. They both knew that their marriage would never be the same. The love they once shared had been irreparably changed, and as much as they tried to patch the wounds, the echoes of broken trust remained, a haunting reminder of what had been lost. In the end, David and Laura parted ways, not out of anger, but out of the painful realization that some things, once broken, can never be fully mended. They left each other with a bittersweet goodbye, carrying with them the memories of a love that had once been whole, now scattered like fragments in the quiet corners of their hearts. This story ends on a note of quiet acceptance, a recognition of the complexities of love, trust, and the painful process of healing after betrayal. Let me know if this fits or if you'd like it taken in a different direction.